Hello and welcome to this week's Sunday afternoon rant. So last week we had, was it Kira came through and made the whole of the south of England put it underwater. This week we've got Dennis. So those of you who don't know, but what the London Meteorological Office do is at the beginning of the storm season they sort of set out all the storm names through the year, and they all follow an alphabetical sequence, A, B, C, etc., and they give them names. So last week was Kira, this week is Dennis. So Dennis is on its way through the UK at the moment, and it's basically tipping lots of water on the ground, and it's also very windy out there, which I don't know whether you can see that on camera behind me, but the trees are doing that. And again, if you hear some wind noise on the video, that's exactly what it is. It's the rain and the wind hitting this space that I'm in. The other thing is, you may have noticed in the background is some of my studio racking is here. And I thought, well, this was probably a prime time to actually show you how quickly this stuff sets up and breaks down once you've actually got it all set up and ready to go. And I get a lot of questions on the channel about the Gibraltar racking that I use. Yes, it is expensive. I'm not going to deny that you can buy a much cheaper setup, but I guarantee you won't buy a stronger and more sturdy setup than this stuff. This stuff is built like I was going to say something else then and I refrained. It is very, very strong. And I've shown you before sort of me swinging on it, so you can get an idea of just how strong this stuff is. Because I ain't light. So yes, I'm going to do that. I'm going to film that after I've done this. I'm going to do some mailbag sessions after I've done this, which is going to be interesting because, excuse me, moving to a new space is brilliant. I mean, I really love videoing in this space. It's so much space for me. The lights can be quite a way back. I've got all this natural light pouring in from both sides. Brilliant. But it also means that certain things haven't been set up yet. And I found that when I came to set the printer up this morning to print the scripts out for the mailbag item, I realised that it wasn't working for one reason or another. So I normally revert back to the basics too, which would be to have the laptop sitting there, and the laptop's not here either. So it's going to be a challenging day to do filming, but it's my day to do filming, so let's see what happens. So this rant this week is probably not going to be very long, but I am going to read you something, and it's sort of kind of the crux of the rant really, which is, am I too old to work with synthesizers? So I'm going to read you an excerpt of a conversation, and I'm going to have to read it off the phone, unfortunately, because I can't print it out. So you will bear with me. And this conversation is between a guy called Bruce, who I mentioned quite a lot on the channel, and a chap called Andy, who lives in Hobart, Australia. Now, I think Hobart, Australia is Hobart, Tasmania, and there used to be a DJ in the UK called Chris Tarrant who used to play the jingles for the radio station for Hobart, Tasmania all the time. Different story. Anyway, I'm going to read this, and I'm going to read it out as it's written, so bear in mind. And he says, on another T1 topic for discussion of the use versus complexity of an old 2018 note from Hobart, Tasmania. Hi Bruce, you probably read I own a Korg Kronos and the Korg T1. There is 25 years between these models, so a lot has changed. The T1 is actually still my favourite keyboard to use, just because I know everything it can do. So well, it's quick to boot up, very easy to operate, program sequencing is straightforward, and problem free. Obviously the drawback is it's lacking the modern high fidelity sounds. The Kronos is intimidating beast. It has more going on in there than you could ever completely know. Doing simple things can be frustrating and complex. There is a lot of time just setting things up, jumping between menus. trying to route signals and effects. It's never ending. As a result, I haven't actually spent much time writing music on the Kronos like I have on the T1. I feel like I'm taken out of my spontaneous zone into a programming zone, and it's not terribly creative space for me. If I want to record something, I probably just stick with using Cubase and play my tracks in from the Kronos. It's not ideal since once you record a track as an audio, you can't edit it much further. But I do um, but I do it that way just to keep it myself sane. I use the Kronos primarily just for playing rather than recording, which is a shame because when I brought it, my intention was to use it like I use my T1. An all-in-one music creation space, free from distraction of using a computer. Now I'm back to the computer. The Kronos has infinite sound crafting capabilities. So many sound engines, the pianos sound great, but in the end, the T1 is a better machine due to its intuitive user experience. I love some of the old school sounding tones it makes. Even when I program a Kronos to copy the T1 sound, it still doesn't have the retro charm of the T1 has. Maybe it's just my age. I was born into a certain technology era. I'm 44. Maybe younger people love programming the Kronos and can do it effortlessly. All I know is that I'm no dummy when it comes to audio gear. I've trained in audio technology and studio recording. I find the Kronos to be rather bewildering at times, and it takes nearly 2 minutes to boot up since basically it's a Linux computer with a keyboard. Anyone thinking of getting a Kronos needs to be okay with having a steep learning curve and dealing with frustrations due to how different it is to work compared with old school gear. That's my subjective experience. Hope it helps. Cheers, Andy. And the reason for reading that is something that comes up time and time again when you look at new um, keyboards. They're getting complex. In fact, many of the new workstations, as I've said many times on this channel, are in effect computers. If you look inside, you will find a computer motherboard, and the thing is running some sort of stripped down Linux. As its operating system, hence the reason why it takes time to boot up, because effectively it's loading up the Linux kernel, and then on top of the Linux kernel, definitely in the Korg range, it then overlays the specific Korg kernels that actually make the keyboard function. But that's in essence what these new workstations are, and I guarantee if we went and looked at sort of the Yamaha range, the Montage for argument's sake, and the Phantom range from Roland, and anybody else who's out there pushing out a workstation at the moment, we will find very, very similar characteristics of it being basically a computer under the hood, with the keyboard layered on top. Now, as Andy really, really cleverly points out, he's 44. Okay, this was written 2 years ago, so he's 46 now. I'm just a tad older than him, and I have to be honest and say the Kronos was a massive, massive steep learning curve for me. I thought I could just sit down, and because I was fairly au fait with Korg gear, I've got an M1, a T1. I've had in the past, I've had the Trinity, but that didn't last long for one reason or another. And I've played with other, the Tritons and various other bits and bobs that the Korg are thrown out in their time. So I'm quite au fait with the whole Korg ethos, Korg ecosystem about how it works. But believe you me, when you moved up to the Kronos, or when I moved up to the Kronos, it was bewildering. Very, very much bewildering. And Andy hits the nail on the head quite well with the new computerized keyboard. There's not a simple way to do things. You have to kind of get into a workflow about how do you get the sound from generation to speaker. And that sounds a bit daft when I say it like that, but in the old days, typically I'll go back to the T1 because I use the T1 as a good example. You plug an audio cable in the back of the T1, you press a note on the keyboard, it makes a sound. If you set a new patch up, it will automatically default to coming out the left and right, unless you start mucking around with the assignments. but by default it comes out left and right. So when you set a new patch up, a new combi, whatever it happens to be, press no, out it comes. The Kronos is very, very similar in how it operates, but you have to tell the Kronos what it's putting out and how it's putting it out, because it's got its own internal mixer. So you have to assign the sound to a channel, assign the channel to an output, and hopefully, if you've done it right, you get a sound at the end of it. And then you go to the next sound and you assign that to the next channel, and you assign that channel to the next output. And if you don't go through this methodical workflow process of assigning, you don't get the sounds coming out the mix. In fact, sometimes you don't get the sounds coming out at all. So I sort of I really get where Andy's coming from. From a spontaneity point of view, you want to be able to sit down, turn it on, go boom, 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 I want a piano, I want a pad, I want a... And those of you who've got legacy synthesizers know that, the piano's on 0.5, on bank 0, patch 5, that your favorite pad is on bank 2, patch 10, or patch 9 as it is. You sort of kind of know that because you've been working with that machine. Now in the Kronos, again, you still have those things, but it's not as intuitive. It's in user bank this, something that. But if I want to go and see all the pianos, and then I got daunted with a list of pianos, something that the T1 wasn't capable of doing. So don't get me wrong, I don't think it's a step in the wrong direction, because the T1 wasn't really capable of doing that. You had to effectively create custom banks and back them off to disk, to be able to get a bank of pianos and a bank of pads and a bank of strings. And there, if you go and look at some of the T1 discs that I've been lovingly archiving over the last X number of months, one disc is the strings, one disc is the orchestra, one disc is pianos, but they're not purely pianos, but they are, predominantly it's got the sort of your favorite pianos in there. Now the Kronos kind of works the same way, except you're doing it in software. It's got some sort of database in there, and you say when you put a new tone in there or you create a new tone, you say this is a pad, this is a choir, this is a vox, these are strings, this is a piano, this is electric piano, and effectively you're tagging the sound with metadata as you create it. And then the Kronos stores that metadata. And then when you go in and say, I want an electric piano, you press the electric piano, all the electric pianos come up. Not necessarily your favorite at number one. Your favorite might be somewhere else. But in order to get the Kronos to work properly, you kind of have to program it. And I think the T1 you had to program as well, but you programmed it in a different way, in that you loaded sounds into locations. It was far more manual, I think. And a lot of people kind of like that far more manual experience rather than this sort of far more automated experience that the Kronos gives you. Now, am I too old for new keyboards? I'd like to think I'm not, I have to be honest. But there is a learning curve, a period of time before you can take that brand new keyboard and gig it and work with it in the studio. It's not going to be something that you can walk into the studio day one like you used to be able to do with the D50. Do you remember the D50? Take the D50. D50, 100 stock sounds on it. Okay, you could go into the studio with a D50 or an M1, okay, similar, and there were sounds on there that you could go into the studio, you could sit down, you could record, right, without very, very much programming from your perspective. However, with the modern keyboards, I think going into a studio and thinking that you can record a sound straight off bat, I think is a dangerous assumption. I think you, as a musician, need to allow yourself a period of time between purchasing the new piece of equipment and being able to say that you can use that new piece of equipment. Use that new piece of equipment with authority. Okay, that's kind of where I'm coming from, because I don't believe with the modern synthesizers that you can actually walk in to do a gig, or you can walk into a studio to do a session. If you've never used that keyboard before, I think you're opening yourself up for a lot of heartache, a lot of pain, and definitely if you're being paid by a third party to come in and lay tracks down, I think that is very, very dangerous, because you're opening yourself up or exposing yourself to criticism because you don't know your craft. And the reality is, you know your craft, you don't know the instrument, and you need to get familiar with these instruments. And I think it's why a lot of session musicians now align themselves to a brand. That's my personal view. I mean, you see session musicians align themselves to Korg or Yamaha or your Roland or somebody else, purely because they then get sort of into the psyche of how that particular machine is set up. I mean, do I think I could work with a Phantom the way that I work with my Kronos? Not a hope in hell. Okay, it would take me months to get up to speed with the Phantom. It's one of the reasons why I'm at this point in time, I can't be bothered to go and get a Phantom. Even though I've thought about it quite a few times, I can't really, because I just at this point in time don't have the time to sit and learn an instrument which has a completely different workflow. So I don't think I am too old for a new synthesizer, but I do think that a new synthesizer needs a lot of time with me to bed in. And that is where I'm going to leave this one. Hopefully that has been kind of informative. If you liked the content of the video you've just seen, please give it a thumbs up. It just helps the YouTube algorithm with its selection process. If you want to leave a comment, please feel free to do that as well. Down below somewhere should be the ability to do that. I do try to respond to all the comments that are raised on the channel. Sometimes it takes me a few weeks because of what I'm doing, and I'm getting more and more and more comments and questions raised on the channel, so it just takes sometimes a little bit of time to do a bit of research. If you want to be notified when I put more rants, mailbergs, and videos about this sort of legacy tech and even modern tech on the channel, hit the subscribe button, hit that bell icon, and you'll be notified by YouTube when stuff happens. I try to publish at least 2 times a week, sometimes more, sometimes less. Until next time, bye-bye.